Avery. So welcome to the third of our fourth guests today, who I'll be speaking to on this business-focused track. But before I get on to introducing David Cushman, I'll give you a very short introduction about myself. I'm Mark Buchan, Managing Director of The Agile Leader, author of Leaders, It's Not How You Finish, It's How You Start. I'm a leadership and culture specialist, executive coach and consultant with over 20 years experience helping organizations become more agile and troubleshooting agile transformations. I now train and develop aspiring agile leaders. And you can find out more information about me and the other speakers today under the contributors section of the Transcending the Crisis website. So that's enough about me. So I'm delighted to be speaking with David Cushman today. I've been looking forward to this conversation now for a couple of weeks. David is the author of the 10 Principles of Open Business. David runs his own consulting business called Fast Future. Love the name, by the way. And he's going to talk to us today about the responsive organization. So welcome, David.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
I am awesome. As you might have heard there, my head's a bit spinning, but I'm going to ground myself now. And
sure, let's slow things down, yeah?
Yes. I'm sure you're not going to slow me down in any way, shape or form, but it'd be interesting to hear your discussions around responsive organisation. And
yeah, so I'll just cut you short there because it's responsive organisations rather than responsible.
My teeth aren't working.
Yeah, no worries. And really, it's if anyone's staying on this track, because I was just listening to Tony, it's maybe a way in which organisations can, in fact, the members of them, can get a handle on this kind of complexity of the anti-fragility piece in quite simple ways. Because I think the responsive organisation is something that responds to what I would call a context shock, which is something like COVID-19. It's something that impacts us across a number of dimensions. I have a way of measuring that. But it's easy to recognise when something's making a big change to us. And when you get one of those shocks, it actually responds positively towards the new context and the experiences of people in those new contexts at speed in order to create value for those people. So it's always pivoting towards change. It's actually leaning forwards towards change at every iteration. And the ways you enable that is to actually take some of the straightforward principles of what I'd call managed innovation, which is rapid iteration at scale, and have that as your way of working in the organisation. So you're learning from insight at every step, you're setting your requirements, you're speeding through towards value, and you're always creating the next pivot towards the focus on the future that you actually want to deliver. At the same time, organisations that don't do that, obviously we understand that they kind of respond backwards. They tend to collapse down first. They want to then go back to a normal, and that normal has shifted because the value has moved to another place. The context has changed, the experience of people in it, and the value that can be created in a new experience has moved. But it's so those scrambling back to normal tend to end up somewhere lower than where the new value is being achieved. And so what we need to do is have organisations that are comfortable with this kind of rapid rate of change and rapid response to it. And in that way, when you do have these massive shocks come along, it's simply another change of context for the organisation to respond to. It's already an organisation that responds to insight. It's already an organisation that responds to weak signals. And all of those things are where we gather what's coming to us and the trends that we're seeing emerging. It's a learning organisation, full stop. And if you look at the great success stories of even the last 20 years, they've been primarily learning organizations first. They learn from what's around them, they get the customer insight, people talk about being data-driven, etc. But unless you actually respond to what you learn, all you do is stay in a straight line. So they respond always towards the emerging new future, new value, whatever you want to call it. So the kind of other aspect of this is that you need responsive people to be working in these organisations because people drive the change. And I think it's interesting to think about ways in which we can all make ourselves a little more responsive, a little more embracing of new, embracing of change, embracing the looking, actually seeking the learning opportunity from every experience you have. You take that into your work, that's going to help you seek out the new and be comfortable with it And actually, this is really at its guts of understanding and being comfortable with ambiguity, which is what we're all trying to get a head around at the moment. This idea of new normal, better normal, no normal is kind of where we're at. And so we have to be comfortable with change. That's a status of no normal, dealing with constant ambiguity. And that's about learning and responding to it.
So yes, it's interesting. You've actually made my heart sing a little bit here in terms of hearing you talk so glowingly about the learning organization, because for some years, this is the gospel that I was preaching to people, and I'd get short shrift quite often in organizations, with managers would tell me, oh, that's that soft, pink and fluffy stuff. We don't want any of that around here.
How are they doing now?
Well, there we go. So it does make you wonder, doesn't it? But so how would you say then about leaders should go about creating this responsive organization?
There's ways of working. So there's the how of it. There's the huge, great, audacious goal of it, the why of it. And there's the aspects where we're just going to power it. So I think the way of working is simply a switch to a rapid iterative model. So most of the ways we work are still fairly formulaic. We still work in traditional structures. We still work versus traditional timelines. A project has a beginning and end and all the rest of it. If you think about how we operate when we're building something new, right? We go off and we get the innovation hub in, and we work in a huddle, and we bring someone in from that discipline, and we do some design thinking, we do some lean startup approaches, we bolt on a bit of agile, and we work in a very fast way, which leadership is in that group of people. It tends to be working around 5 people. So you're working on small pieces of work at speed, driven by insight. And insight is just so undervalued in most of our decision making. And what we're talking about is creating an organization that makes better decisions at speed towards value, right? So all we have to do is get that insight into the decision making process and have a way in which we can respond at speed to it. So I think that is, in its simplest terms, thinking about how we do the rapid iterative model. Then of course it's about scaling that. So yes, it's great that they do it in a bit of one-off insight over there, but actually it becomes your way of working. So how do you make that happen at scale in an organization? Well, not all at once. It's obviously you have to seed it a little bit here, seed it a little bit there. And when others work in one of those teams for a bit, then they go back to their day job and go, well, this is rubbish. I want to be working like that. They start bringing that idea into their way they work, and then they'll take that into their next piece of work they do. So it's a little bit viral, and it'll spread through the organization, take on a life of its own if allowed to. And then it's about, it's the usual kind of change management in terms of understanding systems and feedback loops, is to say, well, if there's value being generated there, if that's a new way of working that's working, and we provide a bit more energy for it, if we connect the old energies of the business into that, so that there's more capital flow, more people energy flow into those things, and those things get an opportunity to scale. So that's quite a large piece of work. I'm not denying it, but that is how you get to a new way of working. Then there's the piece about the people, and that I don't underestimate that. The people part is so important, because mostly we're afraid of change. We've talked about this, I think, before, this idea that when you're on the savannah, when we're deep in our past, we were afraid of movement, and we learnt to be afraid of movement. And this was a good thing for us, and it's very much ingrained in us. And it's one of the challenges with efficiency as well, is that we're so focused on the task at hand and getting that done without deviation that we can become hung up on that. So the first thing we have to do for people is to shift the mindset. And I think the shorthand for that, a good one that I'm familiar with, is the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, which you've seen in Carol Dweck's work, I think. Right, yeah. You'll find diagrams of it all over the internet. But it's just basic positive psychology and supporting people in getting comfortable with learning and accepting that intelligence isn't something you're born with, it's something that you build. So you learn from doing, and you learn from taking in new experiences, and you haven't got a stock of it and now that's you fixed for life. So it's that kind of differentiation. It's difficult when you've had organisations that have been successful and leaders who have been successful in an old model, because they quite naturally have that fixed mindset. The traditional, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mindset. There are ways I think you can unlock it, which is, I knocked this idea around with a friend of mine, Rory Yates, and we were talking about our shared experience. And we were both brought up playing computer games. So we got lucky that we were a generation that got to play with incremental improvements happening if you press buttons and tried new inputs and saw that a benefit happened. And then we were also right at the early stages of the commercial internet. So we were able to, we used to do whatever we did on a web property succeeded, because actually the whole internet audience was expanding massively whilst through that period. And so we had a psychologically safe environment in which to test and learn. So we became comfortable with this. And I think we were able to take that on into careers in digital transformation and change, because we'd started from a base of, do you know what, when we make tests, they mostly work. Well, that's what we've got lucky early on. So we have to try to give people that kind of same training environment. So the same kind of experiments with playing and learning through play and learning in safe environments, and then take them into, okay, well, now let's join one of these rapid iterative teams. You're going to deploy what you've learned, and you're going to learn, you're going to take in the input of what you learn and make a difference with it. That's the significant thing, I think, from the people powering part of this.
Yeah, I mean, because it's interesting, the parallels, I think, between all of these tracks today, and we could very easily just talk about the people side, here and within the business focus track. But something you said there earlier, though, has sort of left me with a question in my mind. And again, it's almost, I know that I want to ask this question because certainly of a personal bias, but certainly hearing what you said there about not scaling the whole organization at once. Could you just say a few more words about that? Because
I think that's just the basics of organics. I think we talk about organization and we sometimes think about it too mechanistically. We do have to think of the flows of energy that go through the systems of the organization. And if you were to, even in evolutionary terms, things don't jump from mouse to rabbit to monkey. There's lots of steps in between those things. And I think if we embrace a more organic view of what the organization is, we shouldn't expect the whole thing to change overnight. And yet often that's kind of the approach to change management is we're going from A to B, and here's some communication about that, and we're going to run some training. Good luck.
Yeah. We see this is my problem, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of this practice out there, and it's almost embedded now, and I'm not going to mention any names, in certain aspects of a change management community that would see this as this is the way to go, because you disrupt the system, and hey, you'll soon find out if it's anti-fragile or fragile or not. But it's I don't see the benefit in breaking the system. When it's this whole thing about evolution over revolution. Was people would sooner have you break the whole system, but it's certainly from my viewpoint, I see it as rather sensible.
To me, it just aligns with the reality we face. The economy is a complex adaptive system. Yeah. So is an organisation, right? So those two things have to interact. Yes. And the closer they interact, the more reliant they're going to become. So one thing will be to the value of the other. And I think that takes me to something I'm also interested in is to think about what the role of the organisation is within the environment of an economy when that economy has a different function today than we might have described it as even pre-COVID. And I think it was touched on just briefly in the previous session about this kind of the disappearance of the idea of money for a short while and the preference for people. What we've seen is a shift from the the economy being king, or the market being king, the market being able to answer any question that was thrown at it, it's clearly not true when we have major shocks like this. It's the state that steps in actually and spends all that money and makes all the fixing. And it actually describes for us what the hierarchy has always been. It's another of these trends that's emerging from this. So I think we've been run by the idea that it's the economy's stupid, and then it's the government, and then it's us. So the economy makes the decisions for what the government can do, and then the government makes some decisions about what it can do for people. Well, that's reversed all of a sudden. We've now got to think about what the economy can do for the people and the planet, and the government has got to think about how it can make the economy do that more effectively. I think that's an interesting revelation that then starts defining, well, what the role of the organisation is within that. And you are probably familiar with donut economics, this idea that there is a safe space within which humanity, safe and just space, we talk about it, between the kind of top edge of what the planet can sustain and the bottom edge of what humanity needs. And it's operating in that space. That's now what the economy is meant to do, rather than deliver GDP. So it's meant to deliver that safe space for humanity, safe and just space for humanity. So in that context, yeah, okay, what does government do? That's one set of questions. But what's an organisation for? What is the organisation's KPIs when the new KPIs are actually about supporting UN SDGs, UN Sustainable Development Goals? And we are starting to see some shift in that. But in order to do all of those things more effectively, I think organisations need to become more responsive with more responsive people. So that's my loop, if you like, of why that's all connected and important.
Well, you just sparked off another thought here, which is, to me, is quite interesting. Would you say then that we've been operating too close to the top of that donut that you referred to, and this is why maybe we've ended up with COVID? And I'm not going to ask you.
Well, there are those that make that argument that if you stress an environment, which is what was happening, if you're stressing even the environment for wild animals and people eating them and living side by side, there's a risk of, that increases the risk of crossover. So there's a reality about we, as a whole economy, have been proved to be fragile. And interestingly, when it comes to saving our butts, it's the state that is the least fragile element in this. And that's true because the state is us. Right? When the government talks about spending money, they're talking about spending our money. So they're borrowing from us, right? So, but that's a collective thing, a collective and connected thing. We are together anti-fragile in a way that the market hasn't recognised and the market hasn't been able to respond to. It's us collectively that can respond better than the market. Who knew?
Yeah, this is quite fascinating, really, isn't it? Because it certainly does, beg some questions about where does it go next. And because I know in some of the conversations we've had before, Dave, you talk about this notion, this idea about future proofing and sort of looking at the future. And certainly we've talked about, is it fail never as an expression that you use?
Yeah, I prefer fail never because then you're building on what you've learned. So there should never be a fail fast. It should be what have I learned? What insight have I gathered? You've only created the thing that you needed to get the next bit of learning, and therefore you're always building on insight towards value. So I have a preference for that. The other thing there, I think you mentioned about the future proofing, is in all of these potential futures that branch out in front of us, if you look at, if I do the context mapping, if I think about context shock and then what's the next, the second and third order consequences of it, if you do a systems map of that, it can go in a lot of different directions, right? Very quickly. So what you have to do in order to embrace a future is to go, oh, that's the one I intend. So, and we have an intention, we have a direction of travel that we would prefer. And so we can then start shaping the future, because the only future which will happen to you is the one that you don't intend, the one that you make no decisions about. So I think that has been a real learning curve as well for a lot of people who are concerned about how do we we plan our next 10 years? Well, the next 10 years suddenly happened to you. And so you didn't have to think too hard about it when it came down to it. The direction of travel was already there. The trends were already there. So, for example, the trend towards working from home was already being enabled as a technology trend by the technologies that were becoming available. They weren't being invented for fun, right? They were responding to a need, and that need was there. And now we've seen a way in which we can make use of that at scale. I think we're seeing that in things like education. I think there'll be a shift towards a much more niche and targeted to need education, rather than a one-size-fits-all, come to the classroom, be taught the same as everyone else. Kids are going off and actually making their own discoveries and moving at their own speeds in ways that wasn't allowed before, but now has to be. That trend was already there. They were going home and looking stuff up and on the internet and teaching themselves anyway. So there's an endless list of these trends that you could work your way through. But at the end of the day, we have to make decisions about which ones we want to back, which ones we want to steward towards. And that's through putting the energy that we have, our stocks and our flows in the system, towards the things that we would rather steer towards. I'm not saying we can therefore predict and build the exact future we intend, but we can steward our resources towards that future that we intend. And again, I think that is part of understanding responsiveness and about how organisations can themselves respond towards a future they are intending.
See, I mean, there's such good stuff in there that you talk about, and to me, it's about time we had a change to the education system. But I'm not going to get political here today. But it might be a good time to take a question here, because are you ready for a provocative question here, David?
Oh, go on then.
So Scott Lewis is asking, what do you mean by fail never? Learning needs failure. What am I missing?
Okay, so learning needs failure. I suppose every iteration is an exploration. Right? So we're not saying you don't learn anything because the outcome you wanted wasn't the outcome you got, but it's not a failure. Right? It's what you've done is you've learned some more. I suppose I'm in agreement with Scott in that you are learning. It's not a failure if you've learned something, but it shouldn't be to be slung in the dustbin. It should be towards your intended outcome. Or even if it's not your intended outcome, you know the language, it's about pivoting towards the outcome that you're learning you should go in the direction of. And that way you're not wasting resources. It's just straightforward lean startup.
See, again, when we had this conversation before, to me, the perspective that I would take from it is just merely the fact that failures are all about how we think about it. It's a set of judgments we might apply to something that we'd only see ourselves as failing and attribute ourselves as beating ourselves with a whip. So the failure is bad because maybe it's this. I think it's our gyrus, called it like the non-productive mindset. The idea that you've got to succeed at all costs. Failure is not an option, and there is.
I don't buy. I'm not saying that kind of drive on straight ahead because I cannot fail. I'm saying pivot where you need to based on what you learned, but that's not a failure.
Exactly, and again, it's the perspective of what do we mean by failure, and if it's not a failure, look, okay, so you maybe didn't hit this year's quota. Is that a failure or is it not? But we'll learn from it, so therefore it's not a failure. But yes, it's a failure because actually we might not have enough money now in the company to do the next set of developments of our products.
And you raise a really interesting point. What does success look like now? Right. So I think if you are not hitting as much revenue as you did last year, we're going to do 10% more. It's not a failure, right? What will be a massive failure is if you haven't learned. from this year and next. I think we've got 2 years of really peak learning activity.
Yeah.
So your success criteria have to shift to, what can I learn from what I'm doing?
I see.
What am I discovering?
And it's actually somebody's made a comment here on the chat saying, it's Karen here is Feinberger saying that failure is such a loaded word. So it's almost, in some ways you can avoid the word. But look, we've got 5 minutes left, and I'm just wondering if I might, give you the same question I've been asking my other guests too. And if you could name one thing, one practical piece of advice that from Monday leaders could do differently that would make their organization more responsive.
Okay, well, the joke answer, call me, right? That's a really easy one. But the real one is, but the real, I haven't done any promotion other than that. But the real answer, I think, is, the simplest thing people can do is actually ask themselves some questions about their personal anti-fragility responsiveness, right? So what's their mindset? So as a leader, if you sit down and go, okay, well, let me find somewhere to assess my growth mindset, and there's plenty of places on the internet you can do that quite swiftly. Work out for yourself where you sit, and then maybe ask yourself, well, what are my gaps here? But also then start asking the same question of your leadership team. I think, if you could do one simple thing to change the responsiveness of your organization, start with you.
Start with you. That sounds like a really good place to start for sure. We do have another couple of minutes since you've answered that one so quickly. And it was again another question from Scott, who seems to be hogging all the questions here.
Go on, Scott.
Is there a measure for responsiveness?
If you're asking for a KPI, my KPIs would be around, what have I learned? So I have in mind, for example, if you were going to take the responsive people part, how many people have you put through some positive psychology training that's getting you towards a growth mindset? That would be a simple measure of whether I'm starting on the right route to growth. But ultimately, it's about having products and services that are aligning with need. That's the real measure. The measure of success is that you've actually built things in line with what you've learned, and you've done it fast enough to respond in the time that it's still relevant. That's a responsive organisation. That's what we'd all strive to achieve. But I think that the first part of that journey is set learning measures. There's a number of others that I could suggest as really quite hard KPIs that you can set for an organisation going on that journey. And there's things like, we have had some discussions today about weak signals and the value of that and the engagement power of that in organisations. Actually, when you start showing others who didn't spot the weak signals what the weak signals were, it's a really good way of engaging those who had the more closed mindset and didn't spot them. So you might go, okay, well, I'm going to run 10 of these in the first quarter, and demonstrate and show those results back to the team. Those are little simple things you can do that can start showing people what the difference is in thinking in this more responsive way, the more open and insight-led way.
So it sort of answers to the other question from earlier too. So thank you very much for that. Well, look, Dave, we're all out of time here. So again, this has been a really, really insightful conversation for me. One I'd like to carry on more at some point in the future. So, and
thanks,
I'll
Mark.
give you on Monday. So.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's been really well thought out organisation from my point of view, from what I've seen today, and I've enjoyed other people's engagement in it. I also think most of the smart people are watching rather than taking part. So if anyone's out there wants to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn. It's fairly straightforward. I think it's just David Cushman. I'm not hidden. And connect. I'll be happy to see you.
Awesomeness. Thank you very much, David.